Okay, good morning. For anyone that's joined so far, we'll get started in a couple of minutes, and welcome.
Right, that's just the bare necessities. Just trying to see some of those graphs on your background there, Andrew. They actually mean anything? Are they relevant to what we're doing today?
No, these are, the people always think they're graphs. They're actually cities.
Oh, okay, I can't see that far.
No, they're sort of silhouettes of different cities. I'll be honest with you, they don't really mean anything to me, but they look nice in the background.
Perfect.
Good stuff. I see we've got a few people join. Morning, Charlotte. We've got Katie. Hi there, Neil. Give everyone a few minutes to join.
Okay, I've adopted the standing option for today, not the sitting down option.
Okay, welcome to those joining. We'll give everyone a couple of minutes still. Right, we've got 10 people joined so far. Richard and Andrew, should we leave it just another minute for people? You happy with that?
That makes sense.
Yeah, let's go for another minute and then we'll dive in. I know we've got people joining from all over the country today, from southwest and north of Scotland.
People were joining and but couldn't join live, but they were looking to grab the recording for later. So I think there's going to be a few people catching up later.
Yeah, getting into the bank holiday. Okay, good. All right, shall we kick things off?
Yeah, let's go.
Right, great. Taking the time out on a Friday as we lead into obviously a bank holiday as well. So great to have everyone on here. And as for those that aren't able to join, we will be circulating the recording. So thanks for joining. So this is our webinar today, looking at top tips for tackling talent acquisition in public sector. Public sector is obviously a big growing area of Cornerstone, big area of focus. So one of the key things we're looking to do is collaborate a lot more closely with our partners, listen to our customers and help support in these challenging areas that you're facing on a day-to-day within your organisation. So let's jump into the next slide. So for today's webinar, so I'll be hosting the session. I am no doubt familiar to a number of you on today's session already. I'm Chris Binnings, account manager here at Cornerstone. been with the business for 5 years, and I look after our public sector customers. One of my key things for this year, as I say, is really driving that collaboration, sharing best practice challenges and how we can overcome those collectively. And Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So Andrew Brown, I am Director of RPO and Recruiting for Cornerstone. Been in talent acquisition now, I think this is year 15. So pretty close to our clients and the talent acquisition market in general. So great to be with everyone this morning.
Great stuff. Thanks, Andrew. And we have Richard Taylor from Hollaroo. Go for it, Richard. Want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Chris. Yep, so I'm the commercial director at Hollaroo, and I've been with although I've known Hugh and the team at Hollaroo for about 20 years and been involved in staffing for a while. I joined a little over a year and a half ago to give some support around customer success and deployment and use of data within the talent community and onboarding processes. So yeah, again, thanks very much for everybody joining. Great to be on the call.
Great stuff. Thanks, Richard. And very much for those who are new to Hollaroo, Hollaroo are a partner of Cornerstone. We work very closely with Hollaroo very much to help complement our recruiting solutions. And we'll talk about this obviously in a bit more as we go through the session and how they can help. We do have somebody absent from today's session, unfortunately. We were due to have somebody from Essex County Council joining, who has had to send their apologies. They are moving house today. Completion day and house move fell on the one day that we'd organised the webinar for, so they do send their apologies. But we will be including some of their input. We've asked them some questions, some ideas that we can thread into today's session as we move forward there as well. But they do send their apologies on that as well. Okay, so let's move forward. Great stuff. So a quick bit of housekeeping. So everyone will be automatically muted on this as well. We know what it's like working from home with noisy children, pets and delivery people. Please feel free to pop any feedback, questions into the chat. We'll pick those up as we go through today's session. And then we have allowed time at the end for Q&A and open discussion as well. Likewise, if there's any questions that we don't get around to answering or that come to mind after the session, do share those and we'll make sure we get those picked up as well. And we'll be circulating the recording and the slides to go with this as well. So if there's anyone that hasn't been able to attend or you think it would be of value, let us know. We'll get that shared with you and that can be circulated as well. Okay, so we've got introductions out of the way. So what we're going to do next is dive into a quick poll to get some feedback from you on today's webinar. We're then going to have Andrew talking through the Cornerstone perspective of what the current fight for talent looks like with a focus on public sector. We'll look at candidate data, employer branding. We've got a second poll in there looking at the impact on organisations with these challenges. We'll look at social media presence and the impact and the importance of that as well. And then future state of work, often driven by transformation projects, but more collectively, the ever-changing state and future of work. Then we'll have a bit of a wrap-up summary of what we've covered off in today's session, and then allowing plenty of time for questions that we've picked up through the session as well. So firstly, let's dive in with our first poll of today. So we want to understand, what are the challenges? So what are the biggest challenges your organisation is facing when it comes to talent attraction right now? So it might be a yes to all of these, but give us your top answer, whether that be employer brand, so the way that you're perceived within the talent market and candidate market, social media presence, finding candidates with the right skills, big challenge out there right now for every organisation we work with. Data, so what it means if you have that lack of meaningful data to support your processes and what you're seeing. And then pay. So we've selected our top 5. So the poll should now be on your screen. So I'll give everyone a minute to get their votes in, and then we can have a look. like I say, I'm sure all of these will probably sit on everybody's radar to a degree.
Mm.
I'm going to look at what are the top challenges there. Okay, so that's hopefully enough time for everyone to get their vote on there. So if we could now see on screen with the results, there we go. Okay, so let's work through that list. So 8% saying employer brand, social media presence 23%, way out ahead, finding candidates with the right skills. Interesting. Lack of meaningful data 8%, and then pay 31%. Interesting. So it's really that finding candidates with the right skills out there that is way ahead. I figured it would be based on the types of conversations that we're having with our customers day to day. But that's really interesting. So we will come on to that theme as we move forward as well. Okay. Right. So next, I'm going to pass over to Andrew, who's going to be talking you through and giving you a bit of a Cornerstone perspective. Andrew's got bags of experience. Cornerstone has thousands of customers, but he's going to give us our kind of insight and take and perspective on what that fight for talent looks like currently in public sector. And we've got a couple of slides that have got some visuals, which Andrew, I'll flash up as you start talking through those. So over to you.
Great, thank you, Chris. First and foremost, I'm really pleased with the outcome of that poll because it ties very nicely in with what I'm about to say. Perhaps if it would have been a different answer, this may not have been the best opening. But I think first and foremost, as I said, it was wonderful to be a part of this conversation. It's such a relevant topic right now. And I think as Chris alluded to, a lot of conversations with customers within the public sector and, and many outside of the public sector as well. And it seemingly is a trend that we're all being impacted by the same, the same challenges. I think I'm lucky enough to work pretty closely with many of our customers within the public sector and outside of it. I think furthermore, I speak with consultants, advisory bodies, advisory boards to sort of better understand impacts, challenges, trends, all within the recruitment space. As we've said, the one constant right now, and I think the biggest single item that is ultimately keeping HRDs up at night, and many of you on the call, I'm sure, is this talent shortage. I think we're in a bit of a perfect storm when it comes to the challenges we all face. And I think that's compounded when perhaps we look at the public sector. Strangely, I think one of the very few benefits from a shift to work from home as a result of the pandemic was this wider talent pool that many organizations have benefited from, sort of a post-pandemic world, if you like, where the talent pool widened. However, I also think this led to a far more competitive market, where all of a sudden candidates who were ultimately no longer ring-fenced by perhaps their willingness to commute. I think when we look at public sector organizations, those that perhaps once benefited from the pick of local talent, local skills, the pandemic to a degree, and the shift to home-based working has seen that same local talent pool erode to a degree, as many now look further afield for perhaps better compensation or home-based roles. Ultimately, it opened up the market for candidates. I also think there's been a lot of talk, you've probably seen a lot of coverage around this great resignation. I've seen a huge number of white papers. It's often a subject when you sort of go to webinars or you go to sort of conferences. There's been a huge amount of coverage in it. I think in theory, one may think that perhaps that would have led to, perhaps it would have given employers perhaps a greater pool of talent to select from. But I think in reality, those that benefit are probably the candidate and organizations with deeper pockets. To give you a bit of an idea, I was speaking with a client outside of the public sector, I'm hastening to add. There was an organization that was willing to pay 4 times the market value for a specific candidate, ultimately blowing the competition out of the water. Now, whilst inflated wages may be to a degree, a level of sort of post-pandemic bubble, I think in reality, organisations who don't have the luxury of deep pockets need to now review and overhaul their current recruitment strategies to try and identify new ways of attracting the right skills into their organisation, and importantly, recognising and rewarding skills they currently have and wish to retain. Today, for me, organisations, and in particular the public sector, need to rethink their talent acquisition strategy. How can you remain competitive in the talent market, compete with organisations that perhaps offer more attractive compensation or work from home packages? And how can you position your organisation as one in which candidates want to come and work for, that they buy into the culture and ultimately buy into the brand that you're trying to position? I was in part of a conversation as part of a dinner a couple of weeks ago, and a really interesting conversation came up with a client who has started a new initiative, and it's something that I'm starting to read more and more about, which is an OVP. Now, many of you may have heard of that term already. If not, it stands for the office value proposition. So how can employers attract staff back into the office, ask them to buy into the value of returning to the workplace following on from the pandemic? And I think that's a really interesting shift in employers carefully managing their employees and ensuring they don't drive attrition up from a hardline return to the office policy. I think an effective talent acquisition strategy is not something you can build overnight. For me, it's something you need the right amount of time and resources to kick it off. But first, I think it's important to understand where your company stands in the market. What are your goals? What needs to be improved within the hiring process? And critically, what does the future of your workforce look like? Then I think you start embedding these outcomes into your processes one by one, from improving your employer brand, leveraging the right technology, boosting collaboration, collecting data. Data is absolutely paramount here. To make the most out of on-demand learning and things with other technology as well. I think each of these are critically important to improving the current goals of the majority of our customers that we currently work with. Most importantly, finding the right skills for your organisation and future-proofing your organisation. Once again, thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to taking you through the top tips for tackling talent acquisition in the public sector. Back to you, Chris. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, I think some great points made in there around, especially, I think, the skills piece, as we saw in that survey. Reviewing processes, being quite critical of processes, looking where to improve, embracing technology in the right place, and candidate experience in there as well.
I'd be really interested to understand if anyone's sort of discussing this office value proposition as well. It's something that one or two are starting to talk about now in order to try and attract employees back into the office. But it would be interesting to pick up on that at the end and see whether or not it's something that is becoming part of people's agenda.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that whole culture, how you get new candidates and new hires brought into a culture when a large part of that culture is now virtual, as we know.
Yes,
so,
yeah, absolutely.
Great stuff. Thanks, Andrew. All right, good stuff. So, Richard, we're over to you now to have a closer look at candidate data and how that can really help support initiatives. DE&I being the one that is mainly sort of front of mind for a lot of our customers. So, over to you.
Thank you very much. I think if our colleagues from Essex County Council were on the call, they'd echo what you were saying there, Andrew, about not just the use of data, but also the importance of retention. That's something that I've spoken to them about a lot recently, about using data to identify people in the organisation and to try and create ways of maintaining longer term, increasing retention. So I think this ties in with D&E quite well, because while we're talking about the problems of finding the right talent, obviously what we're keen to do as well is look at what the potential solutions could be and how we can all sort of talk to each other and help. So if we think about diversity as a general topic, we all know, the business case for diversity is well established. Diverse companies have consistently out-earned their industry peers. They've maximised and retained valuable knowledge and expertise, but at the same time they're attracting fresh perspectives from best talent. And I think from there they're getting a great deal more retention as well. The other thing to bear in mind is that there was a government-led report, the McGregor-Smith review, that noted that Britain are currently losing something like £24 billion annually by failing to bring talented Black, Asian, minority, ethnic professionals into the workforce. So I think, like I said, I think the case is established well enough. I think everybody knows that we need to be more diverse. The question then is how do we create a culture of inclusion? And in this context, to pick up on the data message, you can't really manage what you can't measure. So there's again been plenty of debate around that. And some of the areas that people are looking to measure and manage are diversity quotas, targets, and goals. So just to, and I'm sure many of you know these things, but just for a point of clarity, quotas are time-bound, measurable objectives. They're usually set by an external body. But the important thing on the quota is that it's an authority, the body that sets them has the authority to impose penalties for non-compliance. Where it's being used quite well in sort of many EU countries like Norway, France, etc. One example is where Norway introduced in 2006, they introduced a 40% minimum quota for each gender for public companies, and they achieved this by 2008. So there's no doubt that in this context, quotas can work quite quickly, because what they do is they force the diversity issues to the top of the business agenda, so they get plenty of visibility. But what they also do is they encourage a wider search for candidates, which greatly increases the talent pool. So again, this kind of ties into where we're trying to find more people with the right skill sets. The only thing we do need to be mindful of, I think, is whether this helps to overcome the sort of stereotypes and biases that affect underrepresented groups. So there's a sort of a cautionary tale there as well. Targets are the second of the three, is also time bound. They're also measurable objectives, but they focus on the business taking key actions to achieve them. So where they differ from quotas is that the individual business themselves are responsible for setting those diversity targets alongside any self-imposed penalties for their own failure to achieve them. And then finally, there's goals, which are, I would say, they're the broader, the more aspirational statements of intent, which the business adopts. They're not usually time, or they don't have to be time-bound or measurable, but they often are. So basically, collecting and analysing data on diversity in this way, we've got a much better chance of gaining the relevant advantages. And if we think then about, where we can have some impact, there's a number of areas, but I'll focus on three. One of them is key insights, another being empowerment, excuse me, and then top-down thinking. So in terms of key insights, over the last 30 years, whether it's been DE&I or accounting, manufacturing, sales, I've personally seen businesses try to report on or measure a broad range of KPIs. Often there's been a difference between the reports used by the exec teams and the ones that they circulate to the operational teams. So much to everyone's frustration, it leads to sort of extended debates about who's got the latest report or the correct version. Sadly, meeting agendas get disrupted because people spend more time debating accuracy and relevance of data instead of making more informed decisions on what the data is actually telling them. Now, the reality is that most organisations have pretty much access to all the right data, and I suppose, like many, probably feeling that we live in a world where there's no shortage of data. It's a bit overwhelming sometimes. The challenge really, and again, this is something I've spoken to Danny at Essex about, the challenge is trying to get the right data in the right format so we can create some meaningful insights. So when we're thinking of insights, data needs to be presented in a way that's consistent and simple, but also relevant to the person using it and comparable. So comparable by, what I mean there is last week, last month, last year, whatever it might be, to show progression and potential trajectory, which is going to lead into allowing people to make smarter decisions based on that data rather than just subjective decision making. The second point I made was empowering people. So having identified the right data, we've simplified it, we've made it relevant, and we're starting to distribute it in a meaningful way. What we then need to do is empower people. And I saw this when we've implemented investors in people in a number of places in the past. If you give people the power, you effectively grant permission for them to act on the data that they're reading and potentially come up with their own assessment and decisions for change. If you can avoid leaving that part of the process just to the sort of central HR, D&E or people analytics teams, your own teams become more empowered to develop their own understanding of the connection between their daily decisions, the things they're doing, and the resulting diversity outcomes. And it generally leads to a much more agile, creative way of thinking by using that data. Obviously, that kind of leads on to the fact that it means you're creating an environment where your employees are able to make better use of their talents and skills and put this to far better use for things like external, internal hiring, mobility, promotion, and so on. And you can break this down further if you really want to into more granular levels of sort of by division, by level, location, and so on. As businesses' appetite for data grows, then you tend to find the more granular reports come through. The final point on this is making sure that diversity as a philosophy is embedded into the culture from top down. So locking that into the company's business goals, hopefully which are recognised and even published in the same way that sustainability goals are, so that everyone's operating on the same clear agenda is obviously going to encourage delivery of those goals. How are we doing for time, Chris? Just conscious of.
We're good. Yeah.
Okay, good.
We are all good at the moment. Yeah.
Good. So I'm just going to finish this off with a couple of examples of some use cases, I suppose. It's going back a while, but close to my heart for a reason I might share with you in a second. LOCOG, which is the London Organising Committee for the 2012 Olympics and Paralympic Games. We were lucky enough to be involved in that a while ago. And the reason I pulled it out is because even though it was at 2012, they had a very clear idea about what they wanted to do about diversity and inclusion. So the point is, this is obviously not a new topic. They had some very aggressive diversity challenges, and they put them on. They achieved those targets. They had to embark on a very rapid plan to get 200,000 people into the project. To do this, they extended, as I said there on the bullets, they've extended that beyond their internal teams and included third-party contractors, consultants, etc. Once they'd established those reports and criteria, they had all staff having access to a monthly top-line snapshot of the metrics that they'd agreed that they were working towards. And they split this across 7 dimensions, including things like gender and gender identity, disability, and so on. And on top of that, the senior leaders received detailed monthly reports, which were broken down by department. So they set out the reporting criteria and data. They delivered those reports in a meaningful way. And then finally, the diversity data that was presented to the people was presented alongside recruitment targets based on each relevant market. So it was much more meaningful to the people. And then there's an ongoing measurement. Each department was benchmarked and each functional area ranked on their hiring record for each month. So it meant that LOCOG as a team were able to identify patterns early and to intervene very quickly if there were any irregularities that were cropping up. So more recently, we've been involved in an organisation called 10,000 Black Interns. It's an initiative that provides support for young professionals to get into the finance, investment and banking internships in the city. And it's just a more recent great example of what can be achieved when data is used to identify the right kind of activities to achieve that common goal. So, and that kind of wraps up the hints and tips and the summary, but I think we'll probably be taking questions later on. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an idea on how data can be structured, used and deployed to deliver on diversity and inclusion
Certainly does. Yeah, thank you, Rich. No, I think some great examples in there, and I think you're absolutely right. You sum it up, the right data in the right format so it is usable in your organisation. Exactly that. Good stuff. Brilliant. All right. So on to our next section. So employer brand. How do you make yourself stand out in that very candidate-driven market right now? So we're going to be handing over to Andrew for this one. So Andrew, I'll pass over to you.
I will come off of mute. You think after 18 months of only Zoom calls, someone would know how to come off of mute?
That's it. You've only had 2 years of practice, but we'll
I know.
Yeah, don't worry.
I still haven't got that down. So thanks very much. I really, employer branding is a conversation that we are constantly having, and we have had from the day of the inception of ATSs. How do you tie your employer brand? How do you really drive effective recruitment as part of that? So let me give you a sort of bit of a background. So as to sort of why organizations within public sector who we've supported over the years, and again, I'll reference clients outside of the public sector because ultimately it's relevant across industry, in my opinion. So let me just give you a bit of background as to why it's so important for companies to focus on their employer brand. Ultimately, differentiation. What makes your organization unique? What helps you identify the talent that you want to attract, or the personas that you're searching for as part of your EVP? Attracting customers, candidates, and the people behind your product and service are ultimately the differentiators. So I think for us, a strong employer brand indicates employees are happy, engaged, resulting in a great reputation, helps you retain your existing talent, which is, as we talked about, super important in today's market, but importantly leads to that continued growth. I think it's always interesting to share a stat, and I'm sure many of you have come across this stat before, but did you know that 64% of applicants would ultimately share negative experience with friends and family, and 27% of those people would then actively go on to discourage others from applying? So I think the implications or the impact of a bad EVP can ultimately be disastrous. I think as a company, you're always looking to uncover, recruit, and retain the best talent that you've got, or that ultimately exists. But there's a problem, and that problem is your competitors have the same aspirations. And I think with the reputation of a company more visible than ever, and we come back to this sort of this stat around applicants sharing negative experiences or discouraging others from applying. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, they would talk to a small subcircle of friends or colleagues around their experiences. Now you have, your reputation of your company is ultimately more visible than it's ever been, be it through job seekers, Google search, or reviews on sites such as Glassdoor and Indeed. And I think anyone who is now looking for a role will typically go to those types of mediums to sort of get a sense of, what's people's feedback on an organization? Is it somewhere I want to go and work? So I think having a compelling employer proposition is probably never been more critical, but also it's never been more challenging than it ever has as well. I think if you look at, I suppose, with the finite of truly exceptional individuals that can make a difference into your organization, I think it's essential that you stand out from a crowd in attracting talent that's out there, as well as keeping hold of the people you already have. And I think that's where your employer branding strategy comes in. It sets you on that journey to locating prospects that fit well into your organization, and clearly demonstrating why they'd ultimately feel at home within your organization. I think it comes down to how you project your employer brand. How are you viewed by your current workforce, the people that you one day hope to recruit? Your employer branding strategy needs to be transparent and also consistently promote these types of things to your existing team, but also those that you intend to recruit in order to achieve your goals, which is ultimately distinguishing you from your competitors. Why are the right skills going to come to your organization to work them perhaps a competing organisation, or a competing borough, if you like. Demonstrate why someone would want to work for your organisation, and ultimately illustrate how your brand is developing and strengthening over time. I think they're really sort of 3 key areas that are important to remember. So when we look at the importance of an employer brand, I think it's fair to say an EVP brand, employer branding strategy, the need for one is stronger than ever. Today's candidates, they have a wealth of information. We talked about Glassdoor, we talked about Indeed, and they're just 2 examples of platforms that highlight your company's culture and processes. There's also your website, your career site. There's also other marketing channels to consider. And word of mouth spreading on different types of forums. I think if your negatives outweigh your positives, you're not dedicating the same attention to your employee branding strategy as perhaps your competitors. And ultimately what that leads to is you stand to miss out on the top talent. And given the the world we are in, and that shortage of talent, it's more important than ever. I think in the world of talent shortage, ultimately compounds the issue of skill shortages and how you're going to set your organisation up to future-proof against that potential skills gap. So developing a brand that appeals, connects with today's increasingly web-savvy candidate, I think is vital, but it also can lead to numerous benefits. What works well then? Let's talk a little bit about what works well and some hints and tips, I suppose, at this point. So, to give you a little bit of an idea, we've worked with many public sector organisations. I think the ones that I'll call out as sort of leading lights, if you like, COSLA in Scotland. They're an organisation that we work with. They're specifically focused on public sector. We worked with them very closely over the last, I think it's getting on for 12 years now. And a lot of their focus has been around how can they improve the employer branding around each of the local authorities they currently work with. A lot of the work that they did initially was to audit the perception of a brand. So before even going down the route of developing the branding strategy, it was important for them to understand how people view some of the public sector companies that they work with. And that was, we've touched on it a little bit. So understanding what's being written and what's being said on employment review sites. So most candidates will be researching these in detail before making a decision on the next employer. What are people saying about your company? What are people saying about your processes, your cultures? Do you get 5 stars? Do you come across as an attractive brand? Are there negative reviews? And if so, have you addressed those particular negative reviews? Social media is another big one. Now, I won't say anything on social media because I'll be stealing Richard's thunder from the sessions coming up. But again, social media is super important for the perception of a brand. I think overall, where you need to start on this journey is auditing your existing brand's perception on multiple different channels and clarifying whether you're presenting a consistent, compelling, inspiring message to your existing members, but also prospective recruits. I think the next stage is what makes your company different? Why should I join your organization? So knowing what makes your company unique goes a long way to crafting your story. I think as an organization's mission statement, its values, its social responsibilities, its culture, I think these things feed into your employer branding strategy by determining why someone would choose to join or stay with your company over a competitor. To effectively establish your differentiator, your USP, therefore it's important to reassess your own values and compare these with potential alternatives for recruits. I also think you need to determine and utilize primary marketing channels. So we've seen a lot of organizations that we've worked with over the years focusing on not just career sites, because that's part and parcel, but also their overarching careers, their overarching website. Is it what is the message that's being portrayed, as we sort of talked about on the previous piece? Is it portraying the right messaging, the right values? Does it give an idea of what type of workplace that you're offering? And then does the career site mirror this? Are you making it easy for candidates to identify roles? So how are you ultimately going to reach your prospective candidates or your prospective recruits how you're engaging with existing employees as well. I think as part of establishing your sort of persona, you should have a clear understanding of what channels, you should have a clear understanding of what channels you're going to connect with candidates you're seeking. I think it's also vital that these defined as part of your employee branding initiatives, and the consistency is maintained across all platforms you plan to utilize. I think a lot of work that we've undertaken with clients in recent years around the careers elements I touched on. However, one fundamental mistake which is often made in ensuring the career site option within the wider website is easy to find. Such a simple thing. You know, we often audit customers and look at websites and look at career sites, and often organizations make it super difficult for candidates to find the career site option as part of that your wider corporate website. So simple things can make huge strides. I think, you know, moving on a little bit in terms of is the next stage. Once you've identified, you've audited, you've understood perception, you know, ultimately you need to then create your EVP. You know, what's your promise to current and future employees? What's the offer that you're going to make about being passionate about being part of your team? And I think at the center of your EVP needs to be employees, their motivations, their interests, their goals. And ideally, your proposition will cover everything you're looking for to connect them to your company in a positive, fulfilling way. I think to this end, you should consider what matters to your existing employees.
Great stuff.
Just wrapping up with a final couple of points, and I appreciate maybe running a little bit over, but I think one of the big things and one of the big shifts we've seen is the investment in current team development. We've seen a huge drive in recent months around either reskilling, internal mobility programs, career development paths, opportunities internally. You know, perhaps the right skill, the right talent is already sat within your organization in order to fulfill those future jobs. And I think the final thing really just to say is, I think whenever launching an EVP, it's critical that you have internal review, you have internal alignment, you have senior strategic stakeholders, and more importantly, you continue to assess that strategy's success once you've implemented it. Too often, we've seen organizations implement a sort of new EVP or redefine their EVP, but ultimately then not monitor the success or tweak it over a period of time to ensure it remains relevant and remains successful. So appreciate I'm slightly over on that one, so I'll stop there. Back to you, Chris.
Great stuff. Thanks, Andrew. Yes, I think some great areas covered there within that brand piece. Yeah, that whole visibility. We know how easy it is to go out there and find reviews, feedback, and for candidates to make that decision pretty quickly whether they probably pursue a role or opportunity at that organisation. A great insight. Thank you very much. All right, good stuff. So it is time for poll number 2 of today. Yeah. So whilst we're looking at all of these different challenges that we are facing in the recruiting resourcing world at the moment, there's obviously going to be an impact. So there will be an impact upon your organisation. So we are keen to understand what that typically looks like. So based on the challenges that we've discussed, what would you say has been the most prevalent impact on your organisation? So we have, again, we've gone for our top 4 and an other answer as well, which if that comes up a lot, we will discuss that one. So is it a financial impact? Is it more around risk and compliance? Is it delays upon your projects? Is it a failure to meet some kind of target and deliverable? Or is it something else? So if we could have the options on screen, everyone can vote on those. That'd be great, thank you. And we'll give everyone just a little longer just to get their votes in. Okay, and Hollaroo team, if it looks like we've got all the results, if we can flash that up on screen as well, please. Okay.
Interesting.
So a dead heat at the top then. So financial impact, 33%, the same as risk and compliance. Project delays, 22%. Yep, hearing that a lot at the moment. Projects being pushed out. Failure to meet other targets and deliverables, none on that one. And then we have other. So I'll be keen to dig into what that other might look like. So if people want to pop those in the chat or talk through those at the end of the session, that would be great as well. Brilliant. Okay, good stuff. And I think this is real world insight as to what, you as our customers are hearing, seeing, and living in the real world. So it's, I think, great to look at those in more detail. Good. All right, so on to our next section. So now we're looking at social media presence. It's a big area that Andrew started to allude to. Rich is going to take us through this one in a little bit more detail and talk about the growing importance of having the right level and the right type of social media presence. So Richard, over to you.
Thanks again. Yeah, I mean, Andrew said that we can very easily overlap these two topics because I think they go hand in hand. If we think about the EVP and strength of brand, social media then can become the vehicle to deliver that employer brand. So we'll spend a couple of things on that. One thing I would say, just to kick off with, it's probably worth noting, I've had a few conversations with people lately, there's a very different approach to targeting people for a particular job as opposed to targeting people to join a community. Obviously, if you want to target someone for a particular job, I think some social media platforms are perhaps not so strong because you've got to hit that target whilst they're thinking about that job. But if you approach people through social media for talent communities, then you have a better chance of building a bigger, broader talent community. So there's some interesting subtleties around that. But I think generally, when it comes to social media, I think we can agree it's firmly embedded in business life today. But what we are seeing is that there are still quite a few companies that are hesitant to use it in areas like talent acquisition and hiring. And I think that probably, some of that is probably because the way it's used is perhaps not as accurate as it could be. The problem is that if organizations are not using social media, then they are going to be losing out on some of the the more flexible and powerful tools that are available, and you won't find these sorts of things, the capabilities elsewhere. I am aware, and I think we can accept that there's perhaps a degree of risk within the public sector values such as merit and transparency to screen potential public servants. But one of the things I've talked to Danny about at Essex is if you build the right kind of strategy and you have the right kind of people using it in a professional way, then it can be a very proactive and valuable tool, just like anything else. And I think I suppose the cautionary tale here is to not think that social media is just a platform that's going to do the job for you. It's like any other tool, like an ATS, CRM. It needs thought. It needs a strategic approach. We need to think about what we're trying to achieve with it, and there needs to be associated success criteria and ongoing management. So there's quite a bit to social media. It isn't just chuck something out on Instagram or Twitter. So what do we mean by using social media in the right way? If we think historically, the only channels that people were using were things like post and press and email and physical events and so on. And as we all know, these were quite cost prohibitive and resource heavy. They were also, though, quite generic. So you weren't able to be very relevant. So if you think junk mail, flyers, things like that, people got buried in irrelevant information and just get switched off. Social media, on the other hand, has got an ability to broaden the reach of the messaging that you want to push out there, and actually start to incite some more meaningful conversations. And it also does that in a much more cost-effective way. It also has the ability to be much more targeted and relevant. So in essence, what we're doing then is just turning this around a little bit and making it much more focused around the candidate, on the employee, because what we've got the ability to do with social media is to try and add value from their point of view. And this again is where it kind of turns into or contributes to developing a much stronger brand identity. So in terms of what I'd call rules of engagement, what I'd suggest is, and what we've seen and what we hear, is that it's crucial to establish a strong and meaningful level of communication between your organisation and your target, let's call it your target market, the consumers or the candidates. And the great thing about social media, of course, is that we have a range of rich content that we can share. So things like videos, insightful imagery. We can give access to employees, ambassadors within the organisation through Q&As and things like that. We can highlight what a day in a life looks like within your organisation, and we can share examples on culture and DE&I and all sorts of other things that are relevant to the decision making that candidates are likely to be going through when they look at your organisation as a potential future employer. So using things like that in that way, it means that social media can be actually quite a positive. It can be a very strong vehicle. But what it also does, it allows us to deliver accurate messaging across all of those platforms in a really consistent way. And I think that's one of the quite critical points. As recipients, we're kind of hardwired and prone to grow more comfortable and interested in messaging that we find is consistent, and especially when those messages are arriving in the platforms that we've chosen to follow. So things like Twitter, Instagram, and so on, because we've associated the trust with the platform. Therefore, the messages we're sending out to these people become more trustworthy in that sense. So again, it's another way in which it helps to strengthen the brand image as well. And also, Andrew mentioned before about the negative side of messaging and brand. Bad news travels very quickly. Viral messaging on the positive side can be equally as powerful. So the reach of people's networks becomes very powerful with building extended talent communities. So, and then when it comes to sort of internally, how do you manage these things? Again, Andrew touched on this, alignment. We talk about alignment of recruitment teams and social media teams to encourage sort of joined up thinking and get them focused on the same objectives. Especially if we think about the cost of recruiting for hard to fill roles like social workers and social care professionals, it quickly gets expensive when you're using those more traditional methods, especially when they're not reaching the right audience. So again, another example of the conversations I had with Danny at Essex, prime candidates for these roles are often the passive candidates or the people out of area. There's been some interesting comments about hybrid working. And I know that Danny's using social media to target people outside of the Essex area to work on a remote basis. So I think it can be used as a source of good as well. So,
brilliant.
So just to quickly summarise, how am I doing for time, Chris? Are we okay?
Yeah, let's rattle through the a very brief one on takeaways, and then we've got Andrew
I think
leaving us 5 minutes for Q&A at the end.
Yeah, I would say these are fairly self-explanatory. I'm not going to insult intelligence by repeating what I've just said. The only thing I'd say here is just in terms of social media, trying to put your candidates, your potential candidates and people at the heart of what you're doing, put them front and centre. And humanise that brand, as Andrew was talking about. That can be easily brought across in social media, and I think all of those things have a much better impact on not just the people you're targeting and getting the right people into the organisation, but has a positive impact on your diversity inclusion goals as well.
Great stuff.
Thanks, Chris.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richard. All right, great stuff. So we're on to the final section now, where Andrew will be rattling through probably to make sure we do leave enough time for questions and feedback, and a couple of bits in the chat to just address there as well. So Andrew, over to you to talk through high level at transformation and future state of work. Summarise probably into about 3 minutes, if that's possible.
Oh, let's see what we can do. Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to talk a little bit about digital transformation and then how that results in, the future of work, if you like. So earlier we touched on the impact of the pandemic the current job market, similarly the impact on many organisations as a result of the pandemic. I think the impact was the need to fast track digital transformation to deal with that immediate need of now a remote workforce. I think this, what we saw was organisations quickly adopt technology, new technology perhaps they hadn't adopted before, such as video to drive remote collaboration, or video again to drive, something we were doing sort of remote interviewing, through video solutions. I think the uptake and deployment of these types of technologies that enabled some organisations to navigate their way through the early stages of lockdown, if you like. There are some key challenges, when executing the digital transformation recruitment strategy. Getting these key stakeholders and executives to buy into digital strategy is an important thing to overcome. I think these initiatives have to be supported and have the full suite of this full backing of the C-suite. I think it's critical to help drive the change needed, but also to change the culture of an organization when introducing new technologies. I do think, however, the positives definitely outweigh the costs. I think technological software such as automation, AI, increasing efficiency of workforce tools, service quality, ultimately keeping your customers happy and better understanding the needs and the skills of the future of your workforce. I think when we think about it from a recruiter standpoint, these technology solutions often lead to a quicker recruitment process, happier candidates, happier employees. In theory, you're allowing a recruiter to become a recruiter again, rather than many recruiters that I see, across our client base today, where or one of the single biggest issues is where a recruiter is stuck administering a system, rather than being a good recruiter. And I think that's where we try and help solve many of our clients' problems is, how to make the recruiter a recruiter again, not an administrator. So consider also, I think when we talk about digital transformation, also the landscape of the work is rapidly changing. If I take an organization that was largely blue collar recruitment maybe 10 or 15 years ago, that same organization has now adopted technology to replace that manual worker, if you like. I think the types of skills those organizations are now looking to attract has greatly changed. And recruitment plays a central role in identifying, I suppose, or during digital transformation, because companies in many industries need to hire employees who now possess IT-related or engineering-related skills and abilities. And I think in order to attract these new skills into organization, we need to bring together all the elements that we've discussed as part of a much wider technology transformation project. And in order to do this, we need to create a strategy to review and upgrade the recruitment process. I think one of the biggest mistakes we see today is where businesses go out and purchase the latest technology. And that encompasses ATSs, video interviewing applications, artificial intelligence. The number of conversations I have with customers around artificial intelligence, when actually we haven't defined what it is they're truly trying to solve for, is astonishing. I think there's other recruitment technology that ultimately is adopted without getting the basics right first. I think without clarity on your success factors being measured, I think it's typically we find those adopting new technologies will fall back to old habits. And ultimately, without adoption of recruitment or hiring managers of new technology, it's really difficult to drive that adoption across your organization. There is a start to digital transformation, but there isn't an end. It's a continuous process that needs to adapt to innovation, change customer behavior. I think you need to consider both your short and long-term goals as part of a digital transformation strategy. I also think often about how digital solutions can improve in-house or customer interactions, ultimately make it easy to do business for both your employees and your customers. I appreciate I've sort of gone through that final section pretty quickly, but I'm also conscious of time. So back to you, Chris.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. And there's a quick question off the back of that. So we're going to sort of include a more thorough wrap up of today's session. I think we can probably follow that up as part of a summary, because we've had so much great content in there today as well. And if we look to summarize that and then share that with everyone that's been able to attend or register so it can be circulated, I think there's an absolute case there for us to look at that skills piece as our next webinar. I think that alone has been shown as the biggest challenge. We've seen what the impact is on the organisation. So I think skills and what that means now across recruiting, feeding into the development areas of HR talent and succession is probably our next theme. But feeding in, we've got just a couple of minutes left. We had a question from Reg asking, what role do we see AI and tech playing in the recruiting space over the next few years? And do we have any good use cases for that? So Andrew or Rich, I'm not sure if you've got an immediate answer on that one would be good.
Yeah, I think for me, sourcing of skills where artificial intelligence can play a role. I think the challenge that we're facing at the moment is that there are organizations out there that will say they solve for, you know, finding the right skills for your organization without having to manually source. I think there are still challenges within that. I think the challenge is that irrespective of how heavily you rely on artificial intelligence, you still want that human element to interact with the candidate or have a key part to play in that sourcing process. I think where it works particularly well now are things like chatbots. I think actually there's some really great tools available where it can really aid the candidate experience when they're navigating your website. I do definitely feel like we're moving to we need to move to more of a communalization, if you like, consumerization, should I say, of job. And if you envisage what you get when you go to Amazon as an example, you know, they're serving you up products that you are going to buy because you bought similar products in the past. You know, that should be the way the job market works. And I think as a candidate who's navigating your website, you know, it needs to be something that's easy for a candidate. And I think artificial intelligence can really aid that process.
Great stuff. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah. Great. And I think with 1 minute left, I think we could probably carry on the conversation for quite some time with lots of questions and further discussion, but being respectful of it being a Friday and everybody's time as well. Please do reach out to us. We will be sending a follow-up off the back of today's session as well. So we can absolutely follow up on that conversation. All of the areas that we've been talking today, whether it was a challenge around the skills, the social media piece, all of these bigger picture things we've been talking around collectively between Hollaroo and Cornerstone, we can absolutely help with and would love to pick up that conversation. So we will follow those up as well. Stella, thanks for your comment in there. I think that was a really good one to call out around the office value proposition. Yeah, quite rightly. Yeah, the variety of roles you have in a council there are so vast that actually it's a minimum of people who are in the office collectively as well. And one of the feedback was, yeah, another impact is around staff morale and retention if the right things aren't being done around brand and overall image of the organisation. So I think we've covered, and we are bang on time. Phew, we made it through. We made it through. So thank you, big thank you to everybody that's attended today. As I say, we will follow up with all of the slides, the information, and a bit of a kind of wrap-up summary, so everyone's got some takeaways that they can share. But thanks again for joining. Reach out to us, and wishing everyone a very happy bank holiday weekend when it comes around.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks everybody for attending.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Morning.